Thank you for joining us once again for our interviews. Tonight's guest is a military man, the centurion who was in charge of Jesus' execution. History has not recorded his name. Let's call him Flavius, a good Roman name. Welcome, Flavius. Tell us about yourself.
Well, as you indicated, I was a centurion, a military man for life. The centurion was in control of about 100 soldiers at the time, and there were about 6 centurions in charge in Jerusalem. That would be about 600 soldiers. I might add, a call, shall we say, to Jerusalem was not very desired and well-liked. We were looked at as being an army of occupation, and so the Jews resented that we were there. I must say that there was more than one riot due to the actions of a Roman soldier.
So I know that the centurions were key officers in the army, and they had the responsibility to mold and to bring up the officers under them. Tell us a little bit about your duties, would you please?
My duties? Well, the key of my duties was dealing with discipline. The whip was the emblem of the centurion, and it was more than just a symbol. I used my whip, and I used it well, very often on the backs of my men. When we were not running men into battle, we were in charge of executions and scourgings, and we had to make sure there was enough supplies, and then we drilled the men.
Flavius, some of your responsibilities don't sound very enjoyable. Why did you decide to go into this kind of an occupation?
Well, I wanted to become a Roman citizen. And once I was a Roman citizen, I wanted to become a centurion for the money. The wages were much higher. And I must admit that a lot of my duties were not very desirable, but in time I got used to them.
I assume that Jesus' crucifixion was not your first.
No, there you are definitely right. But it was a crucifixion unlike any other.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, right from the start, I knew it was different. Right in the trial, usually a prisoner will beg for mercy. A prisoner is sometimes very, very defiant and in your face. That wasn't the case when Jesus stood before Pilate. Jesus was just silent. And then the soldiers took him away. And the soldiers whipped him and put a crown of thorns on his head and spit on him. And Jesus didn't call down the wrath of God on them. And he actually I could see sad love in his eyes for them, like he wanted to touch their lives somehow.
That does sound different.
And it wasn't just there, it was also at the crucifixion. Things were very, very different there. As I looked at the crucifixion and I watched, and I commanded my men to pound nails into Jesus' hands. He didn't cry out in despair. There was no anguish. There was no anger. He was silent again. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and it was almost like he was loving me as I was there with him.
Wow. Well, what did Jesus say?
Jesus, from the cross, said words that amazed me and shocked me. Sometimes the two men on both of his sides I didn't even hear the words that they said, but Jesus' key word that amazed me was this. It was so different. He said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." At first I didn't understand that at all, and sometimes I still don't. That still is very different, but Jesus' crucifixion was different. What he would say would be different as well. And then there was the horde of people that were responsible for crucifying him. And the lines that they said, the mockery that they gave him, it was, you saved others, but you can't save yourself. They mocked and they jeered at him. And they said, if you are the Son of God, come down from that cross, and then I will believe. And they said, you said that you were going to tear down the temple and in 3 days raise it again. Ha! You can't even save yourself. And Jesus did not curse them. Jesus did not spit on them. You could see love in his eyes for these people. That was so different. Even the two prisoners on the crosses with him noticed a difference.
Why do you say that?
Well, at first, both prisoners made fun of Jesus. They started mocking him. But then, after a while, one prisoner became suddenly silent while the other prisoner continued the mockery. But then he turned and he said to the other prisoner, "We are guilty. This man is not. We deserve what we're getting. He doesn't deserve what he's getting." And then he looked at Jesus and said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom."
How did Jesus answer that?
That's what was so amazing. Jesus looked at him and said, "You will be with me today in paradise." I will never forget the look on a hardened criminal's face when Jesus spoke those words of comfort to him. He was so peaceful.
Flavius, what were your thoughts when darkness covered the whole land?
I didn't know what to think. I knew that when the darkness covered the land that it was something more than just about 3 human beings being crucified. Jesus was there, and there was about 3 hours of darkness, and then Jesus said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And then he said, "It is finished." And then he died. And then suddenly a great earthquake started, and that's when I knew he was the Son of God.
What happened after Jesus died?
Well, I had to stay at my post because the other 2 prisoners were still alive. And I noticed that there was a group of people that were Jesus' followers. And when Jesus died, there was such grief. There was such weeping. And then Pilate sent notification to me of a message.
What did Pilate want?
Well, I kept this in case people wondered what I really had to do so I could defend myself. Pilate commanded us to break the legs of the 2 others who had been crucified so that they would die quickly. The leaders had requested this because the next day was a Jewish high holy day and they didn't want the bodies on the crosses. So the Hebrew scriptures say that a person who is hung or impaled on a tree is cursed. So I followed Pilate's command and I gave the order, but since Jesus was already dead, he didn't have to have his legs broken.
So I imagine with all 3 dead, your men were pretty relieved not to have to spend the whole night out there.
That they were. But soon another message came. Some of Jesus' friends had asked Pilate for permission to remove Jesus' body. That's here as well. And then Pilate wanted verification that he was dead. And after one of the soldiers thrust a spear into Jesus' side, blood and water poured out, and I assured the messenger that Pilate that Jesus was definitely dead. And about those other soldiers, they were very, very grateful to leave. But I tell you truly, I couldn't get any sleep. I could not rest. I thought about what had I done? Whom had I crucified? Jesus spoke of paradise. And he looked at me and he said that he forgave me. I can't comprehend a man forgiving the people that just crucified him. What does this mean?
Did you manage to find an answer to your questions?
Well, immediately, actually it was a day or 2 later that I had to go to my friend, another Roman Centurion. He was in Capernaum and I visited him. And he actually knew Jesus beforehand, before the crucifixion.
And what did you find out from him?
Well, he went to Jesus and he asked Jesus to heal his servant who was deathly ill. And while Jesus was still a long way away, his servant was suddenly healed. And then I was spending the house at my Roman Centurion's friend. I was at his house overnighting, and then we heard the news that Jesus was risen from the dead. I was even more confused, because if his word has so much power and he has so much strength that he could rise from the dead, why would he let me crucify him?
And how did you answer that question?
Well, I chose to look for his followers. So I sent one of my soldiers to find out where the followers were assembling. He told me, and I went to the house where they were assembled, these followers of Jesus. I knocked on the door, and you can imagine when they open up the door and see a Roman Centurion standing there. They were a little afraid and quite surprised. But I told them why I was there, and they invited me in. They sat me down, and they told me all about Jesus. And they told me that it was amazing that followers of Jesus, like Stephen, were martyred and killed because of their thoughts of Jesus. And how amazing is that a follower of Jesus would now be killed? And after they told me that Jesus died for the sins of the world, for Roman, for Jew, for Greek, for Gentile, for us all, an incredible peace came over me.
So Stephen, when he dies, he calls out, Father, don't hold it against me.
Whoa, you're right. And that made me think of Jesus on the cross. When Stephen said that, don't hold it against me, I thought of Jesus' own words when he said, Father, forgive them. There's something about these followers of Jesus, and I had to find out what it was that was so different.
And did you find out?
Well, that's not the end of my story. I did find out when they shared with me about Jesus' love and grace for everybody, and that he suffered and died for the sins of us all. So, that's not the end of my story, because I wanted to tell my friends about Jesus, my Roman Centurion friends, but they kind of looked at me a little awkwardly and a little funny as I told them the story about this man that had died for their sins. But I didn't know what to do, so I kind of stumbled on my words, so I was confused.
Yeah, but you wanted them to have the same peace that you had, didn't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what I thought was this. The key was the difference. What was different about Jesus that made me look at him now and think that he was different? And that same difference trickled down to his followers, and I thought they were different. The difference was love and forgiveness. Jesus loved and forgave the people that were crucifying him. And his followers also loved and forgave people that were cruel to them. So I decided myself, I need to love like that. I need to be kind like that. I need to do good to others, even when they are cruel to me.
So you tried this different way of living by loving and so forth, like Jesus and his followers did. What kind of results did you get?
Well, I will admit it. At first, they called me a dumb fool. Then they also sometimes ignored me, and sometimes it was a little uncomfortable. But I knew that my Roman Centurion friends and all the people of this world needed to hear that kind of love and that kind of forgiveness, the peace that passes all understanding.
Yeah, your story is a very interesting one, Flavius. You're showing us a way in which all who have received this peace from Jesus can help others to have the same thing.
Absolutely. When you share Jesus, people may talk to you and call you a fool. People may mock you. People may mistreat you. But in response to that, to be different, like Jesus and his followers, to treat them with love and forgiveness, that's what we need, and that's what will make a difference in this world.
You're very right. Flavius, thank you so much for being with us this evening. God bless you.
Thank you.
Our worship continues now as we join in singing hymn 843.